Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back. This is Ian bringing you another video in this AI series with the new Boston. So in today's video, I'm going to show you some more cool stuff that we can do with Prompt Layer. Specifically, we're going to create something called a prompt template. So prompt templates are kind of what they sound like. We can create templates for our prompts. There's more to it than that. We're going to show you in this video. But essentially, when we're creating a prompt, we can have like messages, we can have our arguments to our API calls, like the temperature and the max tokens and which model to use. All that stuff can be predefined so that we can use it over and over again. Also, there's a really powerful feature where we can inject variables into placeholder values using something called an f string in Python. And it's going to make it to where it's super easy for us to take a prepackaged template, modify it with just a couple little clicks and changes of our code. So let's go ahead and see what we can see over here on the dashboard interface, and then take a look at it in our code. So if you're logged in to Prompt Layer, then you should be able to go up to Registry at the top here. You'll see all of your prompt templates. I only have one. And then you have a blue button here where you can create a new one. So if we click on create a new one, it defaults to the completions API. We've been using the chat completions API. So if you want to toggle that over, you'll notice that the interface changes a little bit. Essentially, it's going to give us the ability to create templates for the system role. If we click new message, we can create a template for the user role. If we click it again, we can do another one for the assistant role. We can input the name of a function if we're doing function calls. Down here at the bottom where it says functions, we can actually input the information about our functions. If you aren't familiar with function calls, we made a video for that previously, so feel free to check that out. Down here for parameters, we can set parameters for everything from our model name, whether we're using 3.5 Turbo or we're using 4 or we're using Claude instead of OpenAI. We can change the temperature, the maximum tokens, all these other parameters. We can go in here and modify them. That way we have like a preset defined template with the specific parameters that we use, and we can just use that across our different programs. We have metadata, which is a feature specific to Prompt Layer. So metadata just allows you to add additional meta information to your requests. We also have tags. You can go in here and add new tags. So this makes it really easy for you to search through your different prompt templates or your different requests that you made with prompt templates. We also have scoring for individual requests. We'll talk more about scoring in a later video, but lots of powerful stuff here. Now, I'm not going to use the user role, and I'm not going to use the assistant role. I'm just going to use the system role over here. So the title, of course, is important. We'll just do something like assistant underscore type. I already have one called that, so I'll make it 2. And then the system here is where we want to put in our actual template, or actual text anyway. Now we're going to use the f string formatting, which is just single curly brackets for our placeholder values. You can see an example of that down here. But you can drop down with this little caret and you can choose Jinja 2 if you prefer. Jinja 2 is going to give you the ability to use the Jinja 2 syntax, which I believe is just double curly brackets instead of single curly brackets. So whichever you prefer, you can use that option there. So here in the assistant, the default is you are a helpful assistant here in the system role. Now we can modify that to anything we want. So we can say you are a helpful math assistant. And then we can go a step further. We can say, you only answer math related questions, so on and so forth. We can direct it. We can say, hey, if someone asks something that's not math related, then you just don't answer them or you politely decline to answer. And this will set the context for all of our interactions with the chat completion API. Now we can dynamically inject values into this text right here, which is really powerful. So we have math repeated twice here, but also what if we want to change it to something else? What if we want it to be a helpful coding assistant or a helpful theme park assistant or whatever it may be? So we can actually change this using the curly bracket syntax. So we'll select math and we'll do open close curly brackets, and then we can put whatever variable name we want inside here. So in this case, I'm just going to call this one type, and I'm going to borrow that, and I'm going to go find where I have math again, and I'm going to replace it. And so now when we get over to our code and we're actually using this template, we're just going to pass in a variable called type with whatever value we want. It could be math, it could be any of those other things we mentioned, and it'll dynamically update the string before we pass it to our actual API call. So this is going to be really powerful. We're going to show you a practical example here in a moment. You can go ahead and click create template down here and it'll add it to your registry. Now I already have one over my registry, so I'm not going to use that one. Here you can see if I click on this, it's similar to what we just had. You are a helpful type assistant. You only answer type related questions. Anything that isn't related to type will be politely declined and you will gently correct the user. Now, if you go down here, you can see the input variable is type, so it recognized that that was the variable. If we had more than one, it would show us what other variables we had. You can see the metadata, the parameters, your average score if you're using the scoring feature, how much it costs to make this request, how many times you've used this template, the average latency for the use of this template and the request that you made using it. Here's the actual requests and then all the information associated with them. Now, being able to get this tracked over here, we have to take a couple steps in our code. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So the first thing we have to do is take it from here, use it in our code, and then in our code, we take the responses and we link them back to our dashboard. So pretty easy back and forth. I'm going to show you everything in our Python program, but I just want to show you how simple it is to be able to create prompt templates from the prompt layer dashboard. Before we jump out of here, I just want to show you that if you edit this template or any one of your templates and then you update it, it's going to ask you to create a commit message. This is very similar to like if you were using Git or some type of version control. It's just going to be a little comment that indicates to you, which changes were made in this specific version. So I'm going to cancel that, head back over to my registry, click on assistant type. If I click on the versions, you can see this little comment box down here. It's got update title for version 2 and it's got init commit for version 1. So you can see that those are the two changes, and if you were to edit and update and add a new commit message, you would get a new version. This is important because you don't have to create, delete, create, anything like that, a new prompt template every time you want to change a specific template. You can just edit it, update it, and have a whole history of all the versions. So if you want to toggle back and forth between different versions and see how each one performs, you can do that. We'll show you how to change between versions in your code. So that should be everything with the basics of creating prompt templates over here in your prompt layer dashboard. Now let's head over to our code editor and I'll show you how we can get access to the prompt templates in our code. All right, here we are in our code editor. We're in our AI Playground repository, link in the description below. We're inside of the OpenAI examples folder, the subfolder 07 prompt_templates, and then the file main.py. So at the top here, we just have our boilerplate. We're just importing OS so that we can get our environment variable for our prompt layer API key. And then we're bringing in prompt layer. We're setting the API key for prompt layer. And then we're bringing in OpenAI. Now, because we're layering prompt layer on top of OpenAI, the way that we import OpenAI is that we actually bring it in from prompt layer. So that's why we bring in prompt layer first and then OpenAI second. Now, you'll notice the syntax is a little bit different for OpenAI. We're now using this capital O, capital AI OpenAI as opposed to the import OpenAI that we used previously. That's because we're using the newer version of the OpenAI library, and this is how it's done in the most recent version. So OpenAI is equal to promptlayer.openai.openai, and then client is equal to OpenAI open close parentheses. The client is what we're going to actually use to make the calls to the chat completions API. We'll see that here in a minute. Okay, so we have a comment here that says prompt templates are customizable prompt strings with placeholders for variables. So if we go down, we first want to bring in the entire template that we just created. We called it assistant_type, so we can use promptlayer.prompts.get, pass in that name as a string, and the resulting object that comes back will be assigned to this assistant_type variable. Now it's going to have a lot more information than just that system role message that we created, but there is a way for us to easily traverse down into this dictionary and pull out that template that we want to use. In addition to the promptlayer.prompts.get with the string argument, you can actually add a comma and then a keyword variable called version and set it equal to whichever version you want. So that's what I mentioned a moment ago. If you have multiple versions and you want to use a specific version, just pass that in to your prompts.get call, and then you'll be able to use whichever version you specify. All right, so we have a variable called type, and that's our placeholder variable that we want to inject something into. In this case, you could have multiple variables and you could store them in a dictionary called variables. We only have one, but just for the sake of showing you how you probably want to do it, we'll go ahead and store the type key in its current value of web development inside of this variables dictionary. You'll see how we use that here in a second. So we need to go down inside of the assistant type dictionary and pull out the actual template. So the template is the one, you actually have multiple templates if you use multiple different roles. Like I mentioned, you can use the user role, the assistant role, any number of those actually. In this case, we just used the system role. And just like in our messages list where the system always comes first, the system role object, that's the same format here. So when we go down into assistant type, there's going to be a messages key that's going to point to a list of message objects. The first one, the 0th one, is always going to be the system role. So we use bracket 0 to get access to that object, and then it has a key called prompt, and then that has a key called template, and the template key is actually going to return to us the string with the curly bracket syntax for the type variable. And then we're going to actually format that and inject web development down into it. So now that we have the template assigned to assistant type template, on the next line, we're going to create a new variable called content, and we're going to set it equal to the assistant type template variable. And because it's a string, we're going to call the .format method on it, and we're going to replace all of the instances of curly bracket type with web development. The way that we do that is we call .format, and then we pass in type is equal to web development. Now, because we have a variables dictionary, and because the variables dictionary could have more than one key value pair, for example, we could have another one here called name, and that could be something like Jane. We are going to use the double asterisk variable syntax. And what this will do is it'll just take this dictionary, take all of its key value pairs, and it'll pass them in here as keyword arguments. Pretty simple. So if there's a key called type, it'll pass it in like this. And if we had another one called name, it would pass it in like that. Now in this case, we only have our type key, so we'll leave that like that. And then here, just so we can make it dynamic, we'll go ahead and go back to the double asterisk variable syntax. But that's what's happening behind the scenes with the syntax right here. It's going to take that string and it's going to replace any instance of the curly bracket type with the word web development. The resulting string is going to be assigned to the content variable, and we're going to use that down here whenever we actually make our request to the chat completions API. All right, so let's take a look at this syntax right here. It's pretty similar to what we've done in the past with some slight modifications. So you'll know that we've already updated our syntax for the OpenAI library if you watched our previous video with those syntax changes. But essentially, instead of doing openai.chatcompletions.create, we do client.chat.completions, all lowercase, .create. Then we pass in our arguments. So our model, GPT 3.5 Turbo. In this case, we're using the most recent release, 11.06. And then we have our messages list. It always starts with the system role, and then it has the content. Normally, we would hard code this, but now because we're pulling it from our prompt template, and we've assigned it to this content variable, we can pass in the variable here. So this will be that text that we assigned over in the dashboard from prompt layer where we say you are a helpful blah blah assistant, you only answer blah blah related questions, yada yada. And so in this case, it's going to be a helpful web development assistant. Now, when we run it here in a second, I'll show you why this is powerful, but it's really useful that we can just change it one time here, and then it's going to change everywhere else in our template. The next thing that we have here is return PL ID is equal to Boolean value of true. We haven't seen this before. This is a prompt layer feature, and it's just saying, hey, return back to me a prompt layer ID. Now remember, we're using OpenAI, but we're using it with prompt layer layered on top of it. And so we have some additional features and functionality, and that's where this argument comes from. So what's going to happen is instead of just getting back a response object with some stuff inside of it, we're actually going to get back a tuple. So a tuple is kind of like a list, except it's immutable, meaning it can't be changed. And that's the main difference here, is that it is an immutable list. And in this case, what we're going to get back is two things. The first argument of our tuple is going to be the response object from the chat completion call. And then the second one is going to be the ID, the PL request ID that we asked it to return. So we'll just say something random like 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got all of our information inside of the dictionary for the response to the chat completion call, and then we've got the PL request ID. Now, because we use this syntax response comma PL underscore request underscore ID is equal to this API call, and because this is our response, the first thing gets assigned to the first variable, response, and the second thing gets assigned to the second variable, PL underscore request ID. So now we can use these variables later on in our code. So down here, we're going to traverse through the response. We've done this previously where we have our choices. We look at the first choice. We go to the message object. The message object is going to be for the assistant role, and it's going to have a content key, which is going to be the string, which is essentially the answer from the API to our question from our user role. In this case, we've hard-coded it here. What is HTML? So this is going to be the answer to that question. So we're going to print that answer, and we can see what the API is telling us back. Now, mind you, we also got that PL underscore request ID. We're going to use that down here so that we can associate the request that we just made to the OpenAI API with the prompt template that we used from prompt layer. So we say prompt layer.track.prompt. It takes 3 arguments. The first one is going to be the request ID, and we assign that to the PL underscore request ID. That's the one that we got back right here. And then the next one is the prompt name. This is just the name of the prompt template that we used for the request. In this case, assistant underscore type. And then the prompt input variables, that's going to be set equal to our variables dictionary. So we have our variables dictionary right here. And of course, we use assistant type here. And we use the same name here. If you want to put those into a variable so that you don't have to type it twice, that might be a smart thing to do. I haven't done that here, but I would probably do that in a production application. So the next thing we want to do is attach some meta information as key value pairs to our request. So we can do that with prompt layer by doing prompt layer.track.metadata, and it takes 2 arguments. The first one is the request ID. So again, we pass in that PL underscore request underscore ID. And the next thing is a argument called metadata set equal to a dictionary of key value pairs of any type of meta information that we want to include. So this is just some made up stuff that I have here. You could put whatever you want, anything that's relevant to the request that you want tracked. All right, so now that we've gone through the code, let's go ahead and run it and see what the output is, and then we can make some changes to it and see if it does what we want it to do. So if we remember, our variable type is web development, and therefore our system role is set to a helpful web development assistant who only answers web development related questions. Our first question is, what is HTML? So if we run our code, it should actually answer our question. And sure enough, it says, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, etc. So it's actually answering our question in a helpful way. And at the very end, it says, if you have any more specific questions about HTML, feel free to ask. Great. That's just what we expected it to do. Now, if we change it to where it's no longer a web development assistant, and let's just say you're a math assistant, and we leave the hard-coded question from the user as what is HTML, then we should expect for it to give us a different response. So the response from the API is, I'm here to assist with math-related questions. If you have any math queries, feel free to ask, and I'd be happy to help. So this is showing us that it actually used our prompt template, and it changed it to math. And now, because we told it, if you are asked any questions that are not related to whatever the type is, in this case math, then you won't answer them. Now, the other question was answered because it was related to the type. However, there is some room for error here, and this is where this kind of thing gets helpful, because you can track which one of these prompts is working and which ones need to be tweaked and modified. So if we go back here and we change type to English, not English language or anything like that, we just say English, then there's a chance that it might misinterpret it and actually answer the question about HTML, even though we meant, you're like a English language professor or something like that. That's not what we explicitly said, and sure enough, you can see it actually answered the question about HTML, even though we didn't tell it that it was a web development assistant. So this is helpful because you can run these and you can track these and you can see which ones work and which ones need to be modified so that they get you the type of responses that you're expecting. So before we go, let's head back over here. And if we look at assistant type, on the left, you can see all of your requests have updated in real time. On the right, you can see these have not updated in real time. So let me refresh this page. Here we go. So here we have, this was a few seconds ago, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, etc. And you can see all of the different responses. And then when you mouse over the type, you can see this is the one for English. You can see this is the one for math. And this is the one for web development. Now, if you click on any one of these, like we click on this one, for example, it's going to take us over here to this interface. And now we can see which model we used. We can see what the latency was, how many tokens, what the cost was. We can open it in the playground. We can see what the system prompt was, what the initial user prompt was, what the assistant prompt was. We can check the metadata, and this is where the metadata was attached to. So remember that information I put, client type is browser, username is Ian. That's all included here. So that's it for using prompt templates with PromptLayer. Again, there's a lot more to be explored, so feel free to check out the documentation or ask us questions in the comments below. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and we will catch you all in the next video.